Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is Dr. Diane Sanchez, and I am going to review union management relations. First of all, our learning objectives for this chapter is to discuss what a union is and explain why employees join and employers resist unions, outline the current state of the union activity in the United States, identify several reasons for the decline in union membership, explain the nature of each of the major U.S. labor laws, describe the stages of unionization process and the typical collective bargaining process, define grievances and identify the stages in the grievance procedure, and understand how unions have been involved in the global arena. I started my career in labor relations and have a very strong fondness for labor relations, but it is very much a dying art in the human resources profession because many individuals have not experienced unionization or the formation of unions in their workplace. But I think this will give you a terrific overview. Okay, so what is a union? It's a formal association of workers that promotes the interest of its members through collective action. Existence depends on laws and legal action, public opinion of their role in influencing business organizations. So what are the advantages and the disadvantages? Well, first of all, the advantages: employees can provide feedback to employers about their concerns and suggestions, balance the unchallenged decision-making power of management, and lead to increases in job performance and employee earnings. The disadvantages is it negatively impacts the allocation of organizational resources, and that'll be shown in how management really needs to do certain steps that they otherwise would not have to do in a non-union facility. It causes decrease in profitability because having a union is a lot more expensive, and hurt productivity as a result of increased compensation. So, factors leading to employee unionization. You have to remember that back in the 20s and 30s, when the NLRA, the National Labor Relations Act, passed, it was, a place where the working conditions were very difficult. Employees were working sometimes 16 to 18 hours a day. They had unsafe practices back in the 30s. Some employers were locking them into the facilities. Fire hazards, all of those working conditions were really something that impacted the workplace. And when the National Labor Relations Act was passed, it really did grow the representation to about 36% of the workforce. So, working conditions, if it's inadequate staffing, now what we're seeing in these days is temporaries, more temp and business, and so some employees don't like that. Mandatory overtime, unsatisfactory working requirements, unrealistic expectations. Compensation has always been one of the drivers as well. If you're not paying competitive pay or not having adequate benefits, pay raises are sporadic, and unfair allocation of resources. Now, the management style, that is a big reason why employees join a union, is because they feel that management is making arbitrary decisions. They're using fear and intimidation, a lack of recognition for their work, and autocratic leadership. And then employee treatment, again, a very strong reason why people join a union is job insecurity, unfair discipline practices or policies, lack of response to their complaints, and again, harassment and abusive behaviors. Why employers resist unions? Well, unionization does constrain what the managers can and can't do in a number of areas, and we'll go over that. It can lead to inefficiencies in the workplace that cause waste and poor work performance, and it results in higher wages and benefits because employers have to bargain, and that is one of the reasons why the wages are so high is obviously the negotiation of those wages are with a union leadership. Prevention of unions: develop good employment practices, encourage greater employee feedback, offer better compensation, build good rapport with your workers, and then both HR professionals and operating managers must be attentive and responsive to their employees. Nowadays, you don't realize that you're getting unionized because it's a little more subversive. Back in the 70s and 80s and 90s, when I started in human resources, there'd be picket lines, there'd be signing petition cards. It's a lot more quiet, and sometimes companies don't realize they're getting unionized or signing cards and in the process of potentially having a union. All right, one of the things in your book that talks about TIPS, which is an acronym, that you can't threaten, interrogate, promise, or spy. It's called TIPS. And when you are in the midst of a potential organizing attempt, you cannot threaten your employees, you cannot interrogate them, promise them incentives to dissuade them from organizing, or spy on them. So that's one of the things that managers are taught when there's a potential organizing attempt. So, union membership as a percentage of the U.S. Civilian. Look, as I said, in 1945 it was 36% of the population. 2012 now 11%. 0.3, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that employers are really putting in good practices, and that employees don't feel that they need representation because they have that open line of communication with their management, and therefore they do not believe that they need a union. Also, in the geographic areas, you have more employer-friendly laws, which really does reduce unionization, and that's mostly in the South, and right-to-work states. The other thing that the decrease has happened is that unionization was really more in the manufacturing facilities, and because of the decline of manufacturing, construction, and mining surfaces, unionization has gone down. But now our fastest growing segments are retail, financial services, hospitals. So that again is a potential for where we may have unionization to start to increase, and that is because our workforce is changing. So, reasons for U.S. union membership: long-term decline, deregulation, foreign competition, large number of people looking for jobs, general perception by firms that dealing with union is expensive compared to non-union alternatives. And you have a lot more flexibility when you don't have a union environment. And I think our employees realize that more and more. So again, we've talked about the geographic changes, industrial changes, workforce changes. Those are the three areas for the reason why U.S. membership has declined. This is a great chart because it talks about by industry, membership by industry, and you can see our government is predominantly unionized, 37%. Then you've got utilities, and if you look at the bottom, agriculture and financial, insurance, low, wholesale, retail, trade. I will tell you that that is a target of late. Retailers as well as restaurants, things like Taco Bell, Pizza Hut, the low income, minimum wage type of places, McDonald's, Walmart has always been a target for unionization, predominantly because that is they have lower wages and they're so large, and so unions really try to go after those types of jobs as well as industries. So the public sector unionization, mostly highly unionized part of the U.S. workforce, public sector being our government, and it's the largest percentage. You've got police unions, fire, as well as various other public sector. Union targets for membership, as I talked about, professionals, the healthcare industry is big, nurses, even our doctors are unionized. Several universities have started to unionize their professors, which is very interesting. So you've got that. You've also got managed care, those facilities, long-term facilities that are potentially going to be a target for membership growth. And as I talked about, the low-skilled workers, lower paying, less desirable jobs with immigrant working, Taco Bell, Pizza Hut, restaurants, stores like Ross and TJ Maxx and those areas, Walmart. Many employees in these industries are relatively dissatisfied with their pay and their benefits. Many of the restaurants right now are reducing hours because they don't want to provide benefits for ACA, aka Obamacare, and so those workers are becoming disgruntled, as well as they want the minimum wage raised, and it may not happen federally, and therefore they're seeking unionization. Contingent and part-time workers. Now this is important. The National Labor Relations Board, which monitors the National Labor Relations Act, allows temporary workers to be included in attempts to unionize firms. So even if you think that you have a temp agency and that's going to be safe, that they can very much become a part of the voting towards a union. Evolution of the U.S. unions. Here are various things that have happened, obviously. The shoemakers, you can read in your book, led to criminal conspiracy to raise wages. Then the American Federation of Labor, AFL, united several independent unions in 1886, aimed to organize skilled craft workers. And now, years later, right, we have the AFL-CIO, which is a very large federation where many of the unions have joined together. Of late, they have split and now become AFL-CIO and Change to Win. So because they've split because of a philosophical difference, that the AFL-CIO was not being aggressive enough to unionize, therefore Change to Win developed, and several unions went under that, like the Teamsters unions is under Change to Win. Others have stayed with the AFL-CIO. So now we have two big national unions in the United States. So we've got the Congress of Industrial Organizations. As I talked about, the AFL-CIO merged, and then 7 unions split to, most of you probably know Teamsters. They're under Change to Win, and they are extremely aggressive. I would say your Change to Win are the aggressive unions that are going after several of the low-skilled areas. And despite the split, it is still the major organization coordinating union efforts in the United States, the AFL-CIO. So under Change to Win are the Teamsters, the Service Employees International Union, the United Food and Commercial Workers. All right, so types of union structure. You craft workers union, who members do one skill type, like machinist, and unions that include industrial unions are unions that include many persons working in the same industry. So that could be things like I'll call them the Teamsters, right? They have drivers, they have bottlers, they have those kinds of workers. So that's kind of an industrial kind of union. Or United Food and Commercial Workers, that has bakers and confectioners in it. So yeah, those are the examples of the type of unions. The structure AFL-CIO, that is, the labor organizations have developed a complex organizational structure under them with multiple levels, and federation is the broadest level, which is a group of autonomous unions. So again, I've discussed the Change to Win, the split that left AFL-CIO. National and international unions, not governed by a federation, even if they are affiliated with it. And then you've got local unions, maybe centered around a particular employer organization or a particular geographic area. And so a business agent is a full-time union official who operates the union office and assists union members. So you may have a business agent for the Teamsters or for the mining. The union steward is an employee elected to serve as their first-line representative of unionized workers. And that union steward spends a lot of their time being the representative for employees that are under a collective bargaining agreement to be their representative. So here are the major national laws that impacted. And you've got the Taft-Hartley, which is the rights of management. And this is detailed in your book, but one of the ones that I really want to target here is the Wagner Act, which is rights of unions and workers. The National Labor Relations Act refers to the Wagner Act as the Magna Carta of labor, and it was passed in 1935 during the Great Depression. The Wagner Act declared it, in effect, that the official policy of the U.S. government was to encourage collective bargaining Specifically, it established the right of workers to organize unhampered by management interference through unfair labor practices. Now, the Taft-Hartley Labor Management Relations Act is the law that amended or qualified in some respects all of the provisions of the Wagner Act and established an entirely new code of conduct for unions. The Taft-Hartley Act forbade unions from engaging in a series of unfair labor practices. Much of these are like those prohibitions of management behavior: coercion, discrimination against non-members, refusing to bargain, excessive membership fees, those kinds of things. The Taft-Hartley Act was amended, extending coverage to private and non-profit hospitals and nursing homes. So, those are the two really, really big ones. And the Landon-Griffin Act is the third of the major labor laws in the United States. And it really does create a democratic institution to which union members freely vote, elect officers, and approve labor contracts. And it was to ensure that the federal government protects the democratic rights of its members. Under this act, unions are required to establish bylaws, make financial reports, and provide union members with a Bill of Rights. So those go over the major national labor laws. The Railway Labor Act covers basically, it was a shift from government regulations of unions, but it covers railroads, and it also covers airlines. And so it's a very different set of rules under the Railway Labor Act, and that was formed in 1926. So the Norris-LaGuardia Act of 1932 really was the onset of the Great Depression, led to massive cutbacks by employers. And under laws at the time, employers could go to court and have federal judges issue injunctions ordering workers back to work. But Congress passed this law, which guaranteed workers some rights to organize and restricted the issuance of court injunctions. And we've talked about the Wagner Act, which is basically unfair labor practices, interfering and restraining or coercing employees to exercise their right to organize. It encourages or discourages membership in any labor organization by discriminating with regard to hiring, tenure, conditions of employment, discharging or otherwise discriminating against employees because of the employee filed charges, refusing to bargain collectively with the representatives of the employees. Now, the National Labor Relations Board was established under the Wagner Act as an independent entity to enforce the provisions of the Act, and the NLRB administers the provision of the Wagner Act and subsequent labor relations acts. And their primary focus and function is to include conducting unionization elections, investigating complaints, issuing opinions on its findings, and prosecutes violations. Now, the 5 members of the National Labor Relations Board are appointed by the President and confirmed by the U.S. Senate. So usually if it is a Democratic president, there are 3 Democrats and 2 Republicans that the president chooses. And when the shift in the party happens, the new president then decides what the representatives will be on the National Labor Relations Board. We talked about the Taft-Hartley Act. Now, this was important because it is also allows the President of the United States to declare that a strike presents a national emergency. A national emergency strike is one that would impact an industry or a major part of it in such a way the national economy would be significantly affected. The act allows the U.S. President to declare an 80-day cooling off period during which the union and management continue to negotiate. Only after that period can a strike occur if settlements have been reached. So mostly these national emergencies have happened in the railroad industry, airline industry, and because it would have such an impact. The right to work states laws that prohibit requiring employees to join a union as a condition of obtaining or continued employment. So the laws were named because they allow a person the right to work without having to join a union. So in the state of Texas, we are a right to work state, which means you can have unions, but you don't have to join them, but you can still be represented by the union. So there is a lot going on in the whole right to work area. Michigan voted to become the 24th right to work state. And so you really just need to know if your state is a right to work state or not. Now, in some states with right to work laws, employers may have an open shop. That's a firm in which workers are not required to join or pay dues to a union, and most right to work states have an open shop. And then a closed shop is that the firm requires individuals to join a union before they can be hired. But because of the concerns that a closed shop allow union to control who may be considered for employment and who must be hired, Section 14 prohibits closed shops except in the construction-related occupations. This is a great chart with right-to-work laws. As you can see, the West Coast is predominantly without right-to-work states, as well as the East Coast. South and Southeast are pretty much right-to-work states. Okay, so these are the types of union shops that you can have. A union shop requires the individuals to join the union usually 30 to 60 days after being hired. The agency shop makes workers who don't join the union to make payments equal to the union dues and fees to get union representation services. Maintenance of membership shop requires workers to remain members of the union for the period of the labor contract. And your book gives you a lot more detail. Now, the Landon-Griffin Act we've talked about it, but it basically passed that the federal government protects the democratic rights of the members. So unions are required to establish bylaws, make financial reports, and provide union members with a Bill of Rights. This allows you to go out and see how much union members make. And if you go to an NLRB facility, you can use your Landon-Griffin Act to go and see the financials for all the unions, which most companies do when they have a unionized attempt to show the employees how much really union business agents and executives of the union make. Now, U.S. labor laws, the Civil Service Reform and Postal Reorganization Act gave the authority to oversee and administer union management relations in the federal government and investigate unfair labor practices in unionization process. Proposed Employee Free Choice Act. This happened in our last, in President Obama's first term. It has really not gone anywhere. It would have allowed unions to sign up workers on cards and be recognized without a secret election or secret ballot, and that really has not gone through, although they are attempting in many times to do this, pass the Employee Free Choice Act. Now, this is the typical unionization process. If you start from the bottom up, you have a union that starts organizing the campaign. Many companies like Walmart hire consultants who specialize in combating unionization. They use union busters or persuaders. Companies can hold mandatory meetings, but you've got to be careful distributing anti-union leaflets, providing videos to explain to your employees what a union provides or does not provide. And then you get authorization cards. The unions have employees sign union authorization cards. You have to get at least 30% of the employees in that targeted group so that the union feels that they have a good chance at winning that election. It is card signing by the employees to designate a union as their collective bargaining agreement. Then there is a election, and the bargaining union can be a single employees eligible to select a single union to represent and bargain for them. So, for example, in my example of McDonald's, the union would go, the Teamsters would go after everybody in one McDonald's. If they got 30% of the union cards signed, they could request a representation election by the NLRB to be their bargaining unit. Now, supervisors are ineligible, although there's some blurred lines about what the NLRB believes, or the NLRA believes is a supervisor. So you've got to be cautious there. And then some unfair labor practices can also be done during this whole campaign. But the vote happens, the election, and you must have 50 plus 1% of the employees who vote to become a union. So it's not your representation. In my example of a McDonald's, if you have 30 employees there and only 15 show up to vote, and 8 of those 15 vote for a union, then the whole McDonald's becomes unionized. So it's important during the campaign that employers say, if you want to vote no, you vote no, but you should show up to vote. And that's the criticality of the election. So if you become unionized, you have a certification, and the employer must bargain, and refusing to bargain with a certified union constitutes an unfair labor practice. And then you begin contract negotiations. So this is what I've talked about, unionization process. Employers, this is what they do to prevent a union, hold mandatory meetings, leaflets, letters, and videos, emails. The union can take many forms. They personally contact employers outside the work. They can do that, and that is happening a lot. That's why you don't see a lot of activity happening at the location anymore. They're going to their homes. They're mailing things to their homes. They're inviting employees to attend special meetings away from the company. I had a union organizing attempt where they invited people to a church for menudo and tamales and everything after church, and the union invited their families and talked about that, mostly targeting the Hispanic population, low-skilled workers. And then, of course, they're going to publicize the advantages of a union membership. Unions have adopted electronic approaches as well. If you go on websites, you can click on to signing your union card. And then they have salting, which is a practice in which unions hire and pay people to apply for jobs at certain companies to begin the organizing efforts. So those in human resources really need to be cautious about who they're hiring, because they may have a salter in their midst and not know it, and then they have an organizing attempt from that salter. Authorization cards we've talked about, shows that the employees would like the opportunity to vote on having a union. The bargaining unit is eligible employees who want to be represented and bargain collective for them. It is a provision of the National Labor Relations Act to exclude supervisors from voting for unions or joining unions, as well as human resources professionals, by the way. Once unionizing efforts begin, activities happen, but they've got to be happening applicable to labor laws. And then we talked about unions need to receive a majority of the votes. Election results can be appealed to the NLRB if there's a suspicion of unfair labor practices. Now, decertification. Decertification is a process whereby a union is removed as the representative of employees. Employees attempting to oust a union must obtain decertification authorization cards signed by at least 30% of the employees in the bargaining unit before an election may be called. If a majority of the voting in the election want to remove the union, the decertification effort succeeds. So, now, collective bargaining process, whereby representatives of management and workers negotiate wages, hours, other terms of conditions. We talked about all that. This is a great little chart, and it's detailed in your book, the continuum of collective bargaining relations. It just talks about the pattern of bargaining and the distance between the parties during negotiations. Collective bargaining issues. These are really the key areas of what you bargain for when you have a collective bargaining agreement. Management rights. That's reserved for the employer can manage, direct, and control its business. Union security provisions. Contract clauses to help the union obtain and retain members. Union dues, and that's called dues checkoff clause, provides for the automatic deduction of union dues from the payroll checks of unions, which unions really want. And then types of required union membership. We talked about agency, shop, and all those others. Classification of bargaining issues. Now, these are the mandatory issues you must bargain specifically by labor laws and court decisions as a subject to bargain. Mandatory subjects for bargaining: discharge of employees, grievances, work schedules, and union security and dues checkoff. Classifications of bargaining issues also: retirement, pension, vacation, rest, safety, profit sharing, those kinds of things. Generally, mandatory things are wages, benefits, and the nature of jobs. Now, permissive issues are things that are not mandatory that can relate to the positions. So things like, benefits for retirees, product prices for employees, performance kinds of bonds, those kinds of things. And then illegal issues are closed shop provisions or any kind of discriminatory action. So this is the collective bargaining process. Once you have a union, you bargain in good faith. You prepare your documents, your demands. You have core bargaining issues. You continue negotiations in good faith. If you do come to an agreement, you can put it up for a vote, and then it's ratified. Then you have an agreement. But if not, you have a bargaining impasse, and then you may have a strike or conciliation, mediation, or even arbitration. So this gives you the details that you prep for the initial demands. That's wages, benefits, working conditions, management, union rights. Most of the time employers give industry data of what the wages are. The core bargaining obviously is wages, benefits, and working conditions. Then each side attempts to determine what the other side values. Good faith. You must bargain in good faith. Parties agree to send negotiators who can bargain and make decisions rather than people who do not have the authority to commit to a decision. Then you have ratification, the process by which union members vote to accept the term of a negotiated labor contract. And before ratification, the union negotiating team explains the agreement to the voting members and presents it to a vote. This is the typical items in a labor agreement. If you've got a union shop, you have this agreement with all the details of what you're supposed to do. If you do not, this is what it looks like, and it's detailed in your book. Now, if you have a bargaining impasse, there's three types of processes you can use: a process by which a third party assists the union and management negotiators to reach a voluntary settlement, or mediation, by which a third party helps the negotiators reach a settlement; and arbitration, process that uses a third party to make a decision. So, for example, right now here in Texas, American Airlines flight attendants have voted not to accept the union contract that was provided, and they are going to arbitration. And that arbitrator will decide what makes sense for the parties. So it depends on what the collective bargaining agreement and the process is chosen. Strikes, lockouts, and other tactics. Obviously, work stoppages in which union members refuse to work. can put pressure on employees or the employer, or a lockout, shutdown of the company operations taken by management to prevent union members from working. These are the types of strikes that you can have. An economic strike happens when the parties fail to reach during collective bargaining. Unfair labor practice strikes when union members leave their jobs over what they feel are illegal employer actions, such as their refusal to bargain. Wildcat strikes occur during the life of the collective bargaining agreement without approval of the union leadership and violate a no strike clause in a labor contract. Strikers can get discharged or disciplined. And then a jurisdictional strike exists when members of one union walk out to force the employer to assign work to them instead of to members of another union. And then sympathy strikes take place when one union chooses to express support for another union involved in a dispute, even though the first union has no disagreement with the employer. And you see a lot of that sympathy strikes in the grocery industry, where the meat packers may go out on strike, and you have the Teamster delivery drivers having a sympathy strike for their brethren. So we've talked about this, replacement of workers on strike. Other union tactics is obviously making sure that employees understand and express their discontent towards what happens in the employer's workplace. Now, here is what some unions have tried, and management cooperation to really drive a cooperation. We've seen this of late in the auto workers, where there had been an adversarial relationship between the unions and management, but today we're encouraging them to recognize that union leaders and employer representatives cooperate with management and labor unions to resolve their issues. And then they have developed employee involvement programs and union and ownership. That is, employee stock ownership plans for union membership. United Airlines is an employee-owned airline, and so it allows its members to have purchased all or part of the organization. Grievance management is the complaint process by which an employee can file a complaint, and then the grievance is a formal written complaint. Typical division of HR responsibilities in the grievance management is HR assists in designing the grievance procedure, monitors it, assists in preparing the grievance cases for arbitration, and may have responsibility for settling the grievances. Managers operate with the provisions of grievance procedure, attempts to resolve the grievances, documents the grievances, and engages in grievance prevention. Grievance procedures, specific communication channels that are used to resolve grievances. Unionized employees have the right to union representation if employee is questioned by management or discipline may result. So if you've got a sexual harassment investigation and it may result in discipline of an employee, or that management is going to be questioning employees, they have a right to have union representation and their shop steward there. Employees can be reinstated for back pay. The Weingarten rights are violated. The Weingarten rights is a right that and it was named after a case where you violate this. If the employee is dismissed, the employee usually can be reinstated if you have not provided them with their rights of a unionized employee to have representation during the process. Okay, so typical steps. You have a written grievance between the employee, union steward, and supervisor is discussed. Meeting with the union steward and supervisor manager and HR manager is step 2. If there's not an agreement. Meeting between committee of union officers and company managers if there's not an agreement. National union representative and company executive and corporate industrial relations officer, and then arbitration. The steps are pretty detailed in your collective bargaining agreement and what timing you may have to have in each of these steps. Grievance management means that with a third party settles the disputes in arbitration. So if you can't come to an agreement, normally it's arbitrated, and it can be discharges, safety, health, and security. Now let's talk about unions in the global labor arena. Globally, unions are very much affected by international union membership. Co-determination union and worker representatives are given positions on a company board of directors. Global labor organizations are the International Labor Organization and Union International Networks. So this is really becoming more and more a presence, because as we become more integrated with the international companies, you will have unions from various countries. Some of the differences in union management relations is economic issues versus other concerns, organization by kind of job and employer, collective agreements as contracts, and competitive relations. It gives you detailed description of all those in your book. Well, I hope you have found this webcast helpful. I know it is a long chapter, but very interesting for the HR practitioner. Again, thank you for attending the webcast. If you have any questions, by all means, please send me an email.